Nashville. Now was the heart of country music television for a decade, and I found a piece of it in my Uncle Dale's garage in Chattanooga 3 weeks after his funeral, underneath a broken CB radio and a stack of Field and Stream magazines from 1994. 4 VHS tapes, duct-taped together, and on top, in blue Sharpie, somebody had written, "Nashville Now, Ralph Emery, 4/12/89. I hadn't thought about that show in over 20 years, and for about half a second, standing in that garage, I genuinely wondered if it was still on somewhere. It's not, and it hasn't been for 26 years. When I went looking for exactly where it went, I didn't find a cancellation. I found a haste. The Nashville Network launched on March 7, 1983, built by a partnership between WSM and Westinghouse's satellite division, broadcasting live out of the Opryland, USA theme park, right next to the Opryland Hotel, which was the other crown jewel in Gaylord's Nashville empire. Gaylord Entertainment bought it before the year was even out, and for the next 17 years, Gaylord built something that had never existed before, a television network that belonged to country music, run by the people who ran the Grand Ole Opry and, by extension, the Ryman Auditorium where the Opry had been born. Ralph Emery, who would be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2007, one of the rare broadcasters to receive that honor, interviewed George Jones on Nashville Now, and Minnie Pearl appeared so regularly she was practically part of the furniture. Crook and Chase covered Nashville like the local paper it never had. The Statler Brothers show ran for years as one of TNN's highest-rated programs. And before Nashville Now, Ralph Emery had already built his credibility hosting Pop Goes the Country, a syndicated show that had established him as the dean of country music broadcasting. By the mid-1990s, this was not just a channel carrying country content, it was Nashville's own broadcast arm, reaching 69 million American homes. Then, in February of 1997, Gaylord sold it. Westinghouse, which already owned CBS, paid $1.5 billion for TNN and its sister network, CMT, and buried inside that sale was a 5-year contract guaranteeing the Grand Ole Opry a broadcast home on TNN through September of 2002. On paper, it looked like a formality. In practice, it was the only leash anyone had bothered to put on the new owners. 2 years later, Viacom swallowed CBS whole, and TNN came along as part of the furniture. Viacom already owned CMT, so to them a second country music channel wasn't a legacy, it was a redundancy sitting on their balance sheet, and redundancies get cut. On September 25, 2000, Viacom folded TNN into its MTV Networks division out of New York and renamed it the National Network. The flagship show they moved in to replace Nashville's own programming was Monday Night Raw, on loan from the WWF, and the chairman of MTV Networks at the time described the rebranded channel as having a, quote, sort of populist middle America flavor, unquote, which is a remarkable way to describe firing every country music host in the building and replacing them with professional wrestlers. Here's where that contract mattered. The Opry deal was supposed to run until September of 2002, but Viacom didn't wait. They pulled the plug on TNN's country identity in year 3, and the Opry got shipped off to CMT instead. Gaylord, the same company that had built TNN into an institution and then sold it away, turned around and formally accused Viacom of breaching that contract. The seller sued the buyer over the wreckage of the thing it used to own. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's the whole story in miniature. A network built by one country music company was bought by a broadcaster, absorbed by a media conglomerate, and gutted by an executive standing in a boardroom in New York who had never once needed to know who Ralph Emery was. Somewhere in Nashville, the actual owners of the actual Grand Ole Opry were in a lawyer's office trying to enforce a 5-year promise made by a company that no longer existed. By 2003, the channel had a new name, Spike TV. It's Paramount Network today, and the Opry eventually landed at Great American Country, a network with a fraction of the reach TNN once had. And when Ken Burns made his landmark country music documentary for PBS in 2019, He spent considerable time with Ralph Emery precisely because TNN had been the closest thing the genre ever had to its own broadcast home. That fact registers differently once you know the full story of how that home was taken apart. 12 years after the funeral, something strange happened. In 2012, TNN's original hosts, Lorianne Crook and Charlie Chase, teamed up with a production company called Jim Owens Entertainment and a broadcaster out of Chattanooga called Lucan Communications, and they brought TNN back. Not on cable this time, but as a digital broadcast network, built almost entirely from Jim Owens Entertainment's own vault, the same company that had quietly produced around 70% of TNN's original primetime lineup. Garth Brooks recorded promos for it, and it launched on November 1st with WSMV in Nashville as the flagship station, aiming to peak on March 7, 2013, the network's 30th anniversary. It lasted 11 months. Not because nobody watched. It collapsed because Lucan Communications got hit with a $47.4 million fraud verdict from an Arkansas jury over a completely unrelated ownership dispute involving a different network entirely, one that had nothing to do with country music, Nashville, or anyone who had ever watched Ralph Emery. Lucan filed for bankruptcy protection to appeal it, and in October of 2013, quietly, without much of an announcement, TNN was renamed Heartland. It still exists under that name today, and the second death of TNN had nothing to do with country music failing. It was collateral damage from a lawsuit about a completely different channel. There's one more detail buried in there that I think about more than any of the others. The TNN trademark itself had lapsed years earlier, and nobody noticed for close to 8 months. A brand that had once been worth $1.5 billion as part of a package deal just sat there, legally unclaimed, until Lorianne Crook went looking for it herself. The closest thing to a real successor today is Circle Network, launched in 2019 as a joint venture between Gray Television and Opry Entertainment Group, the same organizational heir to everything Gaylord built. It is a genuine attempt to put country music back on broadcast television the way TNN once did. Whether it gets there is a different question. What's left from the original TNN mostly isn't official. There's no studio archive you can stream, no digital vault. Paramount maintains out of respect for where the network came from. The Country Music Hall of Fame has been working to document and preserve recordings from this era, but what survives in the meantime is scattered across the personal VHS collections of people who taped Nashville Now off their televisions in the 80s and never threw the tapes away, uploaded decades later with disclaimers apologizing for using footage they don't technically own. Which brings me back to that army trunk in Chattanooga. 4 tapes, duct taped together, sitting under a busted CB radio for who knows how many years. Nobody at Viacom preserved that broadcast, and nobody at Paramount Network owes it anything anymore. It survived because a man in Tennessee taped it off his television one night in 1989, and then, for reasons he probably couldn't have explained, never got around to recording over it.